Hello and welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. The 17th conference of the parties, which is an annual conference, has been anticipated as a forum for solutions for a better environment for the world. Well, the whole issue of global warming and climate change is obviously at the top of the agenda. It's something that everybody knows about. Countries are now going to discuss commitments to make our environment far better one, in fact, perhaps a more viable one for coming generations. But what is going to happen from the so-called COP17 in Durban? Is it going to be successful? Will the G8 countries commit to environmental clauses, or progress again be hampered by politics? What are going to be the issues which at the end of the day are going to perhaps break the deadlock and promote the kind of environment that everybody wants to see? With me in the studio to discuss this, Professor Glazewski from the University of Cape Town, Claire Volkwyn from Spin Intelligent, and the Minister of Environment and Water Affairs, Edna Molewa, joins us from our Durban studios. Minister, perhaps let me start with you. What do you realistically think is going to come out of this?
Realistically speaking, Prof, is really what we've been discussing for quite some time throughout the year. The Kyoto Protocol balance between Kyoto Protocol and the Convention is what we think must and should actually will come out of this, obviously with a balanced approach. The operationalization of all decisions that were taken in Cancun, what are those? Those are modalities and institutions, for instance, the issues of adaptation. Adaptation committee discussions needs to come to an end to say that the issues that parties have been agreeing or discussing around the adaptation committee needs to be finalized. The Green Climate Fund modalities thereof as an institution must be finalized here. And even therefore that we should be able to continue next year, not now, with dealing with issues of real finances now, sources of finance and so on. The ICA issues, which are the transparency issues, MRV and ICA. We also need to look at the adaptation. We think that that matter will also be agreed upon, or at least a reflection that brings parties together on adaptation. The fragmented nature of adaptation in the text itself will also be dealt with, but more importantly to look at the issues that are remaining from Bali just as issues of agenda, taking them into next year, as well as ensuring that there's some degree of putting together a process forward in dealing with the issue of the legal form of whatever agreements needs to be attained into the future.
That's a very impressive menu, but is it not so that there are significant differences between the way developed countries see this business and developing countries?
Yes, indeed. This is actually a menu, but you know, whatever we do here is, and whatever I'm raising now as possible issues for agreement, are issues that have been discussed for quite a while. You recall that when we came from Cancun, we have been consulting as parties. There have been ministerial meetings. By the way, these ministerial meetings do not necessarily select countries that are developed and countries that are developing. It's consultation forums, informal as they may be, but listening to one another about what are the likely things that needs to be focused on, could actually come out of this menu. So it's really not quite about developing and developed. It's what the world sees as an issue or issues to be taken forward.
Okay, well, let me put this to Glazewski. I read this stuff. It looks to me is a lot of people are saying we may not even get an extension of the Kyoto Protocol, which is really a developed country's business to essentially in terms of law. And that expires next year. Now, if we don't get that, that's disastrous, surely.
Yes, but just to go one step backwards, is the minister talked about adaptation, but the other key word is mitigation, which is what we're talking about here.
Well, perhaps you'd like to tell an audience that's not like you three who know about environmental matters what adaptation means.
Well, adaptation is, as the word implies, there's going to be climate change and we've got to adapt.
Yeah.
But the other big area is mitigation. And that is, we're trying to lessen carbon emissions.
You want to keep it at 2%. Apparently, we should at 1.5%.
But even more, yeah. But the problem goes right back to the original convention, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, where that one principle, 4 words, common but differentiated responsibilities, We recognize we have a global common problem, but the responsibilities are differentiated. Right from there and right to this day, right here in Durban, we're talking about how do we divide up between, by and large, industrialized and non-industrialized,
All right, so
the little bit of carbon budget that we've got left.
is it not true that the developed world bears a huge responsibility for the mess we're in?
Absolutely correct.
Now, they don't want to bear that responsibility.
That's right.
Right? So how do we get around that problem?
Well,
Or should I just go home now and feel incredibly depressed as everybody's going to watch the program's going to?
what the Kyoto Protocol, which you mentioned, attempts to do, is to introduce a system of offsets, as it were, by something called a clean development mechanism,
Yes.
which, if they invest in developing countries, then they get credits in the developed country.
All right.
But that, I think, plays a minor role in the greater scheme of things.
But let me ask you this then. When I read this stuff, and I know that you want to talk about a whole range of other issues, and I accept that, and I want to get onto that. But I read what's going on. We're in an economic crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So that means traditional sources of power are often the best, because in a crisis they're cheapest. Yeah,
Absolutely.
right? And two, when in Cancun and elsewhere the developed world said we'll throw a whole lot of money to help the developing world, well, they don't have that money now.
No.
I mean, if you know, all the money that they've got seems to be wanting to go to Greece and Italy and bail out America itself. So what hope then for a serious engagement with these issues when we're in this kind of crisis, or will it be a default back to the, business as usual, if I could put it that way?
Look, I think if we were to take a business as usual approach, we would be paying the consequences, perhaps not now, but certainly our children or our children's children would pay that consequence. And I think for us to think that whatever we do is done in isolation is foolish. So whether or not we receive the funding, which hopefully we will come to some sort of an agreement on, I think that whatever the discussions are that come out of COP17, the impetus to grow a green economy and to further our development through green and sustainable means does present enormous opportunities for Africa. There are opportunities
to reconfigure its economy.
Absolutely, and not only that, but for us to use innovation to actually be the leaders and the innovators and not to be the followers.
I need to take a break. I want to ask the Minister about this as well,
Sure.
because this is really the important part, but I must take a break quickly. Welcome back. I interrupted you because what I understood you to be saying was, in this globally repression, as it were, recession, sorry, what we have to be doing is thinking imaginatively about how you convince people that, in fact, green solutions are actually economically productive solutions rather than the other way around.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, if you look at prerogatives just around rural electrification, grid electrification is never going to happen to a lot of the rural communities. It's just not economically feasible. But that does provide an enormous market for renewable energy, solar panels, small wind turbines. And there's a great opportunity for us as South Africans and as Africans generally to develop our own economy and our own businesses around these and not be totally reliant on European and American technology to further our growth within these areas.
But is it, you mentioned to me in the break that you would not like, you'd like to see the Minister of Environment, which we have, but you'd also like the Minister of Energy, because you say they're linked together.
What I wanted to say is, you mentioned that we're dealing with environmental matters here, but essentially we're actually dealing with energy security.
Yes, we are.
And we need to move away from the cheap coal that we have and we're exploiting. We actually need to look ahead and invest in our future and move, as Claire says, more towards renewables, because that is ultimately where it's going to happen. We're going to have to make us competitive.
Sorry,
as
I
well.
interrupted you. Yeah, please carry on.
I mean, just one example why that's going to happen, they're going to be taxes. They're talking about taxes on carbon-intensive products. So just because we have a coal-based economy, we can't rely on that forever.
Minister, I wonder if I can just pick up on this. It seems to me that if there is the kind of global recession that we've been speaking about, aren't we going to have to convince the whole world, including the developed world, that there is an economically better way to go about the business? And if that's so, if you only have to look at our country to see how difficult it is to reconfigure from our coal-based kind of power stations to something more green, to say, well, how on earth are we going to persuade anybody else?
Just before I touch on that point, which is quite important, I just want to go back to what Prof was referring to earlier on. I spoke about adaptation, emphasizing adaptation, and I really want to illustrate, or rather indicate that we're emphasizing adaptation because mitigation is adequately addressed in the text. So we're really trying to bring adaptation in line with mitigation. Not that the other way, the other mitigation should go. That's a point I wanted to clarify. Secondly, yes, indeed, it is necessary that we really look at the current world crisis, economic crisis, financial crisis. It's quite an important thing. And I think as the world, developed world and the developing countries work together, we've been able, back then, even in Cancun last year, to find solutions. And these negotiations are always about the balance. Even as we go forward right now, we need to find a balance that parties would say, yes, we can be able to afford this way. Yes, these are the programs that we need to go. That's the only way to go. Now, coming to back home in South Africa, I think it's quite important that many people, you know, just that it's not everybody who's able to be here, just to see what South Africa is doing. I mean, the exhibition itself is actually full of new innovation. Innovations from Mzansi. You know, you can tell Professor what Mzansi means. Right from the grassroots, indigenous knowledge, up to the highest level. We actually even have international innovation here, local innovation, and it's things that we are practically doing on the ground, getting into the green economy. By the way, we have adopted our policy on climate change response, which actually says what sectors are supposed to go green, and those sectors needs to go green in a particular style and that particular period. That's set. And next year, we're going to be having a relook at this policy to even allocate carbon budgets, the amount of carbon that those sectors must address and actually cut emissions. We have to negotiate that. Unfortunately, we couldn't conclude those negotiations before COP17. No, but practical implementation is there. Energy, they are on the off the grid, as the one of the panel member was saying. We're getting off the grid. Solar panels are being hydros, small hydros, wind energy, wind farms. On Saturday, this Saturday, we're actually launching new one. That's a solar panel, 1 megawatt, that's going to help the communities around here, as well as the solar panels in communities. Practical work that's going on. And it's massive.
I got you. I want to just put this to my guest. I'm sorry. Well, if I listen to the minister, then what am I going to be worried about, for goodness sake? Seems to me that we're moving at a rapid rate of knots in exactly the right direction.
As far as power generation is concerned, absolutely. But the thing is, we need to double.
Sorry, last night I was in Johannesburg. Half of the city was blacked out. Now, and when I read the newspapers, they tell me, don't worry, the coal power station is going to be online in 2013. So our recourse is to that. That's why I'm intrigued. I'm very encouraged what the minister has to say. But is this real?
Look, the national national resource plan that the government released still places a certain amount of emphasis on coal. At the end of the day, we also have to weigh up environmental considerations versus cost considerations, and the fact that we do have enormous amounts of coal available for use. There are, however, things that can be done around that. So, looking at cleaner technologies in terms of burning the coal. And, you know, making sure that we're using that coal as efficiently.
Are we doing sufficiently? When you listen to the minister, it seems to me we are. I'm asking you.
I think we...
You are permitted to say no.
I think we are, because I think that at the end of the day, the reality is that renewable energies are never going to be able to produce the base load that a country like South Africa needs.
Okay, well, you see, that's terribly important.
But I think we aren't moving fast enough, and one of the reasons is because Eskom has got combined with NERSA, has a kind of a monopoly on the regime. We've been very slow in allowing independent power producers to produce energy, green energy.
But we're clearly getting some ideas. If I take the minister...
You know, we spoke about refit, the renewable feed-in tariff. We then dispensed with it for some reason, which I'm not quite sure. You know, we haven't grabbed the ball and run with it as hard as we can.
Okay, I've got to take a break, come back, and I'll put this to all three of you.
Okay.
Welcome back. Minister, I wonder if I can ask you this. Obviously, it's terribly important what we do in South Africa, but the wonders about the environment in relation to governance is it's a worldwide problem. It's the one problem that shows us that we're a global village. And I'm intrigued in what you're telling about what people will see in the exhibition, which unfortunately we won't be able to see down here. But South Africa is putting forward this front of imaginative and innovative strategies to this end. What I'm interested in is, are we going to get a buy-in, both from the developed world, in your view, and the large developing countries like China and India, which themselves are not exactly great contributors to environmentally clean world?
At discussions, if you're talking about text, Judge, if you're talking about negotiations at negotiations level, we don't necessarily need a buy-in by developed countries from developed countries.
But you will for Kyoto.
Developing countries. We need, this is a party-driven process. We are equal as parties here. We negotiate, although we have that common but differentiated principle capabilities, we actually still have to negotiate as equals. And the consultation is at equal level. So there isn't any buy-in by somebody from somebody. There's a discussion at equals level, and we believe that the discussions that are on the table right now are actually suggesting that if the developing world, for instance, says, yes, we can come on board, yes, we want to come on board with reducing the carbon emissions and bringing our part, but we also need support to the tune of this much financially, or technology and capacity building.
That's what I wanted to ask. That's what I want to press you on. That's what I want to press you on. I want to say, I understand that. And the two things I wanted to ask you was that if, for example, the United States of America or Britain or some of these other countries, Canada, as I understand it, are going to actually walk away from the Kyoto Protocol, and number two, say, sorry, we've got no money, we've given it to Greece and Italy, what then?
Well, remember that in terms of the declarations now, or the commitments that have been indicated, developing countries, there are over 90 of them that have actually even gone on, whether they had money or not. So there are some of the countries that will go on. China will go on, South Africa is going on. Of course, we need that money, but it doesn't mean that the work will stop. Work will carry on, but we do believe that even if we are at this point in time, at the stage where the world has got this financial crisis, we shouldn't sit here in Durban and plan around a crisis. We should go on and actually get the world leaders to resolve the crisis around us in one way or another, but the talks should not stop. Though that money which is still available, especially because if we're talking about the Green Climate Fund, that's not necessarily going to be bringing us money next year. We needed Fast Start Fund, it wasn't available, but countries went on. We need to really get on to work. And within that, the means that is available, of course, it's not every country that's going to say yes, no, we can't come. EU had already, just a few months ago or so, have announced that this is what they would be bringing.
No, they certainly been very positive. I accept that. I accept that. Can I just ask a response to that? I mean, the minister's got to be right on this. I mean, unless we start thinking differently, pushing these countries, and this picks up what you're saying, we're done for. I mean, there's got to be, I mean, it seems to me that when I study all of this, it's the inability to move to a new discourse that is really, so that people say we can't do it now because it's a short-termism, which is disastrous. Now, is it possible to change that?
I believe it can be. Germany has gone green energy, gone that route. It's dispensed with nuclear energy. And they will, provided we show the willingness and go ahead and go the green route, the green energy route, they have indicated they will assist us financially. So I do believe approaches have been made to the European Investment Bank, to countries like Norway, Germany, Britain.
Should we be concerned about countries like China?
Oh, absolutely. But you know, that's a global issue. I think we should start in our own backyard and do what we can.
And I appreciate.
By the way, China. You mentioned China. Although it is now the largest emitter of carbon in the world. It's overtaken the United States. It is investing in renewables in a big way, and at some point, it's going to take the step and say we are now renewable. In 2010. They were the biggest investor worldwide in renewable energy.
So it's a much more nuanced picture is what you're suggesting. But so Your point, as I understand it, is that Africa should be leading the way in this, but has a real opportunity to lead the way in this.
Absolutely.
Come what may. Come what may at COP17.
Come what may. This is
and
our
definitely
opportunity.
we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is our opportunity. This is our opportunity because we cannot be reliant on funding from the rest of the world. Whatever the moral obligation, whatever the legal obligations that will come out of these discussions, we still have to take responsibility.
Could I ask you one question before I just ask the Minister one final question? You spoke about Africa. Now, I'm afraid my knowledge is pretty much restricted to this part of the African continent. What's happening in other parts of Africa? Are we seeing some similar synergies happening in other parts of Africa?
In terms of renewable energies and stuff?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Can you give some examples to the...
Well, 3 of the largest wind farms in Africa are being developed in East Africa.
Okay.
They have generally within the East African region, they're very reliant on hydro anyway. Unfortunately, at the moment, what they're seeing is that as a result of climate change, is they don't have enough water to produce the power that they need. So they're having to fall back on heavy fuel oil, which of course is environmentally not what they're wanting to do.
Well, Minister, can I then just
take
ask...
it from there.
Yes, please, because I've got... Yes, please, carry on.
Just to take it from there, you know, just about a week and a half ago, President in the DRC, President Kabila, and our President actually signed an agreement that kickstarts a whole huge program of hydropower. That's probably going to light the entire Africa in the DRC. And that's a massive thing. We actually have to work on that. And I want to add that there's a lot of work that's been done in Kenya, in Malawi, in Mali. Really, the movement, I mean, of renewables on renewables is going on forward.
So this
massively.
is our opportunity to actually show that there is a possible alternative approach here, and Africa could have a significant contribution to play in this regard. That's what you say.
Absolutely, yes. But let me just also qualify this. It's not, I think we shouldn't even say at any given moment that we would not need that money. It's not that that we're saying really that everything will stop and anything will stop, but we still require that support. That's number one. Number two, the coal issue that was raised earlier on, indeed it is necessary to note that as we move into renewables, we require some time to really build this infrastructure because it's not going to be happening over just a short period of time. And as we do that, there are many communities out there that still require quite a lot of energy, new industries, new mines that are opening every day.
Well, that's the
Some
challenge.
of these blackouts are caused by those those demands. And as the demands rise, that's why the Kusiles and them are now being built. And all these, by the way, has been built in a very realistic plan that have been calculated and worked out clearly, neatly, for us to be able to pick and plateau at a particular time.
I appreciate it, Minister.
Decline
Unfortunately, I've run out of time. I'm sorry to all 3 of you. It always happens this way. I'll tell you one thing, however. Whether you get the money is another matter entirely. I'm not sure you are, and that's why I think it's terribly important that we've had the kind of conversation we've had as to what in fact can promote the kind of discourse that shows the world that money is required in this regard. Well, the debate we've had this evening really just touches on what is an enormous problem. It's a problem really of global governance, and Professor Glazewski was right when I asked him the question, well, what happens if they bail out the developed world? And he rightly said we have a problem, and the question is how do we get them to buy in? And how do we get the world to understand that this isn't a problem that's simply nothing wrong with my backyard and just everybody else has got the problem? That's the real difficulty. And this conference has to move us forward, certainly better than Copenhagen and hopefully better than Cancun, to the kind of environment that we want. You've heard some of the problems and you've heard some of the issues that we need to debate in South Africa, because whilst it's a worldwide problem, as I think both my guests in Cape Town said, in some ways the buck does stop with us as well. How do you do that, and how do we get the balance right between these considerations of development environment? Judge for yourself. Good night.